Good afternoon. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Liz Eberline, and I am the Education Programs Manager at the National Women's History Museum outside of Washington, D.C. Founded in 1996, the National Women's History Museum is the nation's only women's history museum and the most recognized institution dedicated to uncovering, interpreting, and celebrating women's diverse contributions to society. A renowned leader in women's history education, the museum brings to life the countless untold stories of women throughout history and serves as a space for all to inspire, experience, collaborate, and amplify women's impact, past, present, and future. For those who are with us for the first time, welcome. For those of you who have attended a Sundays at Home program before, welcome back. We thank you for taking time out of your Sunday to be with us this afternoon. A few housekeeping notes. We are recording this presentation so that it can be available on our website following the event. We will be answering questions at the end of today's conversation. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function on the toolbar at the bottom of the screen to submit a question at any time during today's presentation. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon for this special program featuring Stephanie Schriock and moderator María Theresa Kumar for a discussion of Stephanie's new book, Run to Win, Lessons in Leadership for Women Changing the World. Run to Win is for all women who are looking to lead, organized around the steps that Emily's List coaches its candidates through, from deciding to run through celebrating victory. This book is full of essential lessons for any woman trying to succeed in a male-dominated field. Their arena is politics, but their message is universal. Stephanie Schriock joined Emily's List as president in 2010, and in that role has championed women, trained them to lead, and successfully steered the organization through a decade of phenomenal growth. Today, there are over 5 million members of Emily's List, supporters who have donated, demonstrated, and supported women candidates. Since Election Day 2016, nearly 60,000 women have reached out asking Emily's List for help running for office. Schriock's experience through 2 decades of campaigns, including coaching successful women running in recent elections, makes her the authority on the strategies women can employ to run, fight, and win. Moderating this conversation this afternoon, and on her birthday of all days, so very happy birthday, is María Theresa Kumar. María Theresa is the founding president of Voto Latino. She is an activist, social entrepreneur, an Emmy-nominated MSNBC contributor seeking to shake up the political process. Voto Latino, the country's leading Latinx voter registration and advocacy organization, reaches an audience of 29 million people on social media and has registered over 1 million voters since its inception, including over 600,000 this cycle. It is part of the reason Fast Company named her one of the most creative business minds in this country. Elle named her among the 10 most influential women in DC, and Hispanic Executive named her among the 10 most influential Latinos. Kumar serves on the boards of Emily's List and the World Economic Forum's World Economic Forum's Global Shapers. She is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader and a Council on Foreign Relations Life member. We are thrilled that both Stephanie and María Theresa are able to be here today to spend time with us to share in this wonderful conversation. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Stephanie Schriock and María Theresa Kumar.
Thank you so much, Liz, for such a generous introduction. And I cannot imagine being somewhere on a snowy day than tuning in and learning from the fiercest strategist that I know, Stephanie Schriock. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation today. And I'd love to kick it off because I have been so privileged to watch Emily's List become the powerhouse that it is today with you at the helm. And so for everyone who wants to know, why did you choose to write this book now?
Well, first off, thank you, María Theresa, for doing this wonderful event with all of these great folks on your birthday. So happy birthday. And
it's quarantining time. It's great.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's like a little break in between the things. And Liz, thank you for that also very generous introduction, and Shelley for your service today as well. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited that we've got this opportunity. As María Theresa is not just one of our board members and a just complete amazing badass woman herself, but is become just one of my dearest colleagues and friends through this, which actually is part of why we wrote the book too, because it talks about how important we need each other and to build our networks and to stick with our community and to help sisters out along the way. And I couldn't have done the work at Emily's List for these 11 years without your friendship and your strategic support. And I think we feel the same way about our leadership together, which has been really, really a fun. It's the fun part when you do this together. It's actually fun. It's the way you get hard days, but it's fun. So Christina Reynolds, my co-writer, and I decided to start pondering putting together a book as we were watching these thousands of women after 2016's election, which we won't go into details, but was a little sad for Emily's List, which is committed to electing pro-choice Democratic women to office. But thousands were joining up and asking how they ran, how to get started. And then we were starting to meet so many of these great women who were taking on United States House races or legislative seats. And their stories were and are amazing. And we thought, we've got to get this down. More people need to know about the great now Congresswoman Lauren Underwood of Illinois and the now great Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger of Virginia. And I can keep going on and on. So that's how it started. And then we realized it kind of evolved and we need to share the stories, but we also need to provide just some lessons along the way so more and more women rise up in leadership, not just in politics, but in every aspect of our society. And we hope that there's something for everybody in this book that will help your career, your activism, your engagement of however you want to make change. There's lots of change to be made, and we're really honored to have put this book, Run to Win, together.
And so, Stephanie, when you were collaborating with Christina, I think one of the conversations we often have, even at Emily's List, is that the reason we are so adamant about having women in the room is that it changes the equation. Talk a little bit about how hard it is sometimes to be the first one, the only one in a room, and why that informs the work of Emily's List, and what does it mean to not just be the first, but to leave the door open for others?
That's so true. And when Emily's List started in 1985, Ellen Malcolm, our founder, brought together a group of women because this nation had never elected a Democratic woman to the U.S. Senate in her own right. I mean, speaking about not having women in the rooms, we had entire government institutions. Just think about it: United States Senate committee hearings with not a single woman in the committee. Period, which is not the case anymore, thank goodness, because of the work of the last 35 years. But it is so important, not just because there should be a woman, but because it determines the policies that are best for our communities and our nation. And if we are missing huge perspectives of gender and race at our decision-making tables, we will never get the policies that will truly move our country forward to a better, higher purpose. And that's why we do the work we do, that we need women, and women of all backgrounds. We need Black and brown and white women to rise up. There are not nearly enough of any women of any race at the decision-making tables, which means we are missing huge life experience and perspectives while we're making life-changing policies that relate to our families. And that's why we have to do the work we do.
Well, I just, when people say that they never expected women in the chambers of the Senate and Congress. And what I mean by that, Stephanie, is when I worked on the Hill, we didn't even have bathrooms that were right next to the chambers, right? Like there was an expectation that there was just never going to have women disrupt the political game. But you've witnessed firsthand what happens when women are at the table, how they disrupt that political game. Talk a little bit about that.
It is complete. Well, it starts with its demanding bathrooms, which you would think that they wouldn't have needed to do. But Theresa is correct. There were no bathrooms near the U.S. Senate floor when Senator Barbara Mikulski got elected in 1986 and joined in 87, even though there were 2 other women in the Senate. But she had to run to like another building or use the visitor's bathroom. Like, it's like seriously a crazy situation. And that's just a minor, like I know it was a funny example, but shocking because that was 1987, not 1887.
Right. But it speaks that the institutions were never designed for us to be there, even though we're over 50% of the population, right? So I think you speak to that. Like, I think that in itself is revolutionary, right?
It absolutely is. And it goes on and on. It's when Nancy Pelosi became the first woman speaker ever in our history. And among other things, including getting a historic number of women chairing committees and driving the agenda. So not just being on the committee, but actually laying the agenda out and the priorities. It was a huge change, but like a small change, which was not insignificant to our members who were mothers of young children. She put lactation rooms into the US House because there was no such thing as that at all. I mean, oh my gosh, how dare we do such a thing? And then it was still years later when Senator Tammy Duckworth got elected to the United States Senate from Illinois. She's a combat veteran who was very injured, but is like amazing. And she and all of the women, she just had a baby. And all of the women in the Senate had to fight so Senator Duckworth could have the ability to carry her infant, and I do mean infant, onto the floor when there were late night votes. And there's this great story where Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, all of these women we've helped elect, and they're so great, had a conversation with Senator Orrin Hatch, and Orrin Hatch was like, well, what's going to happen when there are 25 babies on the floor if we do this? And Senator Klobuchar, paraphrasing her, was like, progress? You know, it is like the small things, but it's also the policies, and the policies really start changing. I remember, and I was serving as chief of staff for Senator John Tester from Montana, during the debate and the development of the Affordable Care Act. And there's this really powerful moment when there was a debate in the Finance Committee in the Senate about whether or not this bill would treat maternity, having a baby, as a pre-existing condition, whether or not it should be covered by insurance. Now, I'm going to acknowledge something like that is terrible to say, but I didn't even know that was the case. I assumed insurance covered maternity. How does insurance not cover maternity? I was just beyond, I was blown away. But no, that was not the case. And in that committee hearing, Senator John, former Republican senator from Arizona, John Kyle, says, well, it shouldn't cover because I'm never going to need it.
That's brilliant. I wonder if his mother would have had a different conversation with him.
Needless to say, he's former now. But Senator Debbie Stabenow was on the committee hearing, and she just came back to him just very bluntly and said, yes, but I bet your mother did. And that was the end of the conversation.
But that's the stuff that is shocking, because I think that now we fast forward to 2018, and Emily's List had such a charge of changing the face of government as a response really to the election of Donald Trump. And then after that, we had the largest, I think it was over 126 women were elected to both chambers in 2018. And then just a couple of weeks ago, we saw and witnessed those swearing in of Vice President Kamala Harris. Yeah. Some people might argue, Stephanie, that with these women in Congress, with this changing of the White House, that maybe the work is done, that maybe the playing field has been leveled. What do you say to that?
Oh my gosh. If it was level, we would have already had 5 women presidents, or 10, actually 20. It'd be half of them. Like, why isn't it half of them already? I mean, we are over 50%.
Or all of them, right?
Thank you. Late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. How many is enough on the Supreme Court? 9. I love it. I mean, we got to make up for lost time. And women are still only about 25% of Congress, 25%. That doesn't make any sense. Like, it literally doesn't make any sense when the population is over 50% women. And then from the Democratic side, this is a party that is driven by women, particularly women of color, who ensure that every Democrat, no matter gender or race, wins. And so it should even be higher in our caucus. And so here's the thing about this work, and it is not just in politics. And I mean, we all have to take on this responsibility no matter where we are. Because you mentioned earlier, we got to open up those doors, but then we got to pull our sisters in behind us and with us, and particularly our sisters of color across this country. And that is in every area of society. That is in corporate America, that is in law firms, that is in manufacturing, that is in Hollywood, that is in Silicon Valley, you name it. This has got to be intentional. If it happened naturally, it would be happening. But instead, Emily's List has spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars over 35 years to get to where we are, which is good, which we just saw the first woman vice president get sworn in, which is amazing and cool and exciting. But it's 2021.
Yes, it's been a couple of 100 years in the making. So I want to ask you, because a lot of the folks that are tuning in right now, a lot of women that are tuning in are probably a little tempted. They're like, maybe they're thinking about running for office. What are some questions that women need to ask themselves before taking that big leap?
That's great. And that's a great question, because this is, here's the thing. Running for office is not rocket science. I think rocket science seems hard. Now, I'm not a rocket scientist, so I don't know that for sure. So maybe it's not. Maybe going to the moon's not a big deal, but it seems challenging. Running for office is not that. You just need to think through why you want to do it, what values you want to bring to it, what's sort of driving you. And you want to understand the rules of the game. Like, how does this work? And sometimes it's just like really basics, but it's like pieces of the puzzle. And Christina and I really walk through those pieces in Run to Win. It's also very clear on the emilyslist.org website that you can check out our training center that walks through this whole series of questions. But to start, get away from like, do I have the right degrees? Do I have the right background? The answer is yes. I don't even care what your degree is. I don't care what your background is. Like, you do not need to have a law degree. You don't. There are women who do. Great, go get them. But we need diversity of professions, of life experiences across the board. And so I want folks not to get stuck on, am I qualified? Because the truth is, you are. Because you have a story to tell, a community you're coming from that needs representation. The rest of the pieces, learning how to fundraise, learning how to build a team, learning how to go knock on a door and ask for a vote, learning how to give a speech, learning how to do a panel. This is all teachable. These are skills that are great to have no matter what you're doing, and they're teachable. The big question is, do you got it in your heart? Do you really want to make change? Because if you do, then really think about is there a place for you to run for office? And if it's not today, that's okay. But in what I always say, you can't say never. You can say not now. Do not say never. You never know. So you'll never know when you'll be called upon to run for office somewhere. It could be.
You're not asking me that though, right?
Yeah, it could be school board. It could be anything. But it's really about.
Stephanie, I think something that I think this is why I appreciate our conversations always, is one of the things that, and it's also you discuss about in the book, is like, break the rules, break out of the box. And I think that's what you're speaking to, is that we have a tendency as women of a checklist. I need to do X, Y, Z before I do that. And one of the things that we've learned is that men can be called to be an expert witness, and they're like, okay, without that background. So speak a little bit about that book. Like, what are the 2 nuggets of the book that you think that every woman needs to know right now, listening to this?
Oh, that's such a good one. I will say the rules and the system have not been built for us. They've been built by men. Let's be blunt. They've been built by white men over centuries. And so we have to break some of these rules, or we're never going to rise up in the numbers that we should. And if we don't rise up in the numbers we should, we're not ever going to be the nation that we can be. So we've got to do this. So when I say break the rules, I'm not saying like go to jail. I'm not saying break the law.
No.
There are still things that you need to follow in this process, but you don't have to.
But I think when you're
think about the 90s, like how many Navy, because we're, same age and came up in town at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have like all navy and black suits, and maybe if I was lucky, I'd put on a pair of pearls. And we could wear pants by the time I got into town, but that was a fight, by the way, because in the 80s they had to wear skirts, and in politics, and you basically looked like you dressed like a dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of.
I mean, I remember we did arrive in town. Yeah, you did. I remember that I was revolutionary because I didn't wear pantyhose, because in DC in the spring, it's disgusting.
Miserable. It's miserable. It's so hot, everybody. If you're not from DC, it's like so hot. Yeah, no.
And I remember one time being asked it was my chief of staff, she's like, "You're not wearing hose?" And I said, "No." I didn't realize it was a requirement. So what you're speaking to is so true. And I think
it seems like it's little stuff, right? But it's also some of the really big things. For a long time, women were basically not directly, those probably directly, but most often culturally told that their stories don't matter. And so don't be too vulnerable. Always show strength. Don't be too transparent. Protect yourself. You've got to be perfect. I mean, who's perfect? No one's perfect. Yeah. That's absurd. That is an absurd bar to hold to anybody. That is a standard that is impossible to meet. And what we've seen at Emily's List, and what we've really tried to promote, is the story. And your individual story, whatever it may be, with all of its vulnerabilities and truth, connects with people in a really powerful way. And that is so much our strength as women, is if we can get through this. You don't have to be perfect and all of those things, but you can be vulnerable. And in that, you will be a better leader. You don't have to be perfect. And I tell a story in the book about starting at Emily's List, and someone who really meant well was with me at one of my first events. And when you get started, you don't know everything. And by the way, I will tell you, after 11 years, you still don't know everything. So you learn, you keep learning. And I got asked a question in which I said, I don't know the answer, but I will get back to you with an answer. I was pulled aside and told, you are the president of Emily's List. You always have to know the answer.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, okay, but I mean, I could have spun myself out of that, but that would not have been truthful. And that's not the way, that's actually not right. It puts too much pressure on, and particularly women, because women are held to a higher standard on this. And we have to all fight against that. And I think it's starting to break down just a little.
But I also think that in a time when people are looking for authentic, true, real voices in a period of mistrust, your suggestion of saying, I don't know, actually opens us up to learning. Right. And recognizing that is part of the journey. And one of the other pieces that I thought was so important that you mentioned in the book is that there will be loss. but in that loss, there are lessons. Speak to that.
This is really important. And it's part of getting over any fears of taking risk. And for generations of women who were told they had to be perfect all the time, it was really, really scary to take a risk there because a loss would be devastating. And what we want everybody, and it is not just about politics, maybe it's about losing a job or losing someone you love, and be like all the things in life, there is loss. And it's not that it's great, feels great. It doesn't, but it is part of the journey. And in every loss, there are lessons to be learned. And it's so important to take time and learn from those losses. I have not met a candidate who lost a race who was not affected in a way that made her a better candidate in the future if she chose to run, or a better leader, period. Because she learned so much through the process and was willing to take a little bit of time to understand, okay, so what went wrong this time? And sometimes it's external and sometimes you make a mistake. That all happens too. And you go through that process, but it's just part of the journey. And it's going to be part of all of our journey. We've all had losses along the way.
And in your journey, Stephanie, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given over your years of campaigning? And to follow up with that, what is one piece of wisdom that you wish you had learned sooner?
Well, I'll tell you one piece of advice I got that is not good, which is always
But we need those too.
Always eat at every event because you never know if there'll be food again. Let me just tell you, if you're running for office or doing any campaign, that is not a true statement. There is food at every event. And I can say I have been up and down in weight so much because of that piece of advice. So that's bad. When somebody says this to you, don't do that.
No. You'll be fine.
Yeah, sorry. I was just like, I remember getting told that. I'm like, oh, okay. No, there's food everywhere. But I will say that I've gotten a lot of great advice from a lot of people over the years, and I've been very blessed with folks who have stood by me and sort of pushed me along the way, And one of those bits of advice, and I sort of talk about part of this in the book as well, actually came from Sherry Yost, now Sherry Yost Gold, who's a mentor and friend of mine who was a boss of mine years ago. And she was the one who's like, you ask for what you want. You ask for what she pushed the concept of the ask in my head in a really powerful way. She's a fundraiser and development director. She's more of a strategist now, and just and a mother and a businesswoman, and has done great things. But I will say that I didn't always ask for what I wanted when I got started, and I didn't always get what I asked for, and that's okay too. Like, okay, I don't always get what I asked for. Trust me, with my staff, I don't always get what and it's okay, and they're often right, not always, but often right. So that's part of the work. So that's an important piece of advice for all women. We've got to ask, and that's in a lot of different ways. And I don't just mean about money, by the way. I mean about opportunity, about opening up doors, about support. I think all of that, about those promotions, I think all of that's really important, and you got to think about that. So that's a good piece. A piece of advice, I had this interesting sort of learning moment, sort of mid-career, that I guess it kind of fits in the asking part, but clearly maybe the lesson didn't settle in. I took a job as a campaign manager for a congressman who was up for re-election. And it was my first campaign management job. I'd managed staff before. It was my first campaign management job. And so I didn't really know exactly what I was doing, but a lot of these jobs, and that's the other thing, like, take the risk, because most of this is on the job training anyway. Do you think anybody knows exactly what they're doing when they start? No, the answer's no.
Nope.
Yeah, right? It's not, my God, no, right. Trust me. And I wish somebody had sort of sat down and said, it's really important to the best of your ability to get clear guidance of what your role is in the organization vis-a-vis other folks. Who's making the decisions and how do the decisions get made? So as you go into leadership, this becomes really important. What are those decision-making lines? I did not have that conversation on that congressional race, and I never really had the decision-making power as a campaign manager, a mistake I never made again after this race. And decisions would get made around me without the information I had on the ground. And that you just can't do. Like,
did the candidate win or lose, Stephanie?
Okay, I'll tell you what, the candidate won,
yeah.
but by the skin of his teeth. It got really tight at the end, and we hadn't polled because we were saving money. We hadn't put together advertisement, and all of a sudden I was like, I knew something was wrong on the ground. It's like sometimes there's an art to this. And when you're on the ground, so you've been on the ground, you get it. Something is not right. It may not be showing up in the numbers yet, but it's not right. And that's what was going on in this particular race. And finally, through kind of throwing it, I mean, I think I probably threw a 2-year-old temper tantrum. I was just like, this is ridiculous. We got to do something. Like, we're going to lose. And he barely won. And unfortunately, lost a couple cycles later to the same guy. So
wow. But that's true. I think that oftentimes on that radar. Yeah. No, but I think you're right. It's like finding clarity on your role, regardless of when you're going into a job. And sometimes you're right. The title doesn't translate to the trappings, right? Like
correct.
And it is important to do that. And one of the things I think in this journey as women is sometimes people want you as that figurehead because they want to check off a box, and we can't be in a position of doing that. And one of the things I think that Stephanie, that you were able to do is that you ushered in this new group of women in Congress. And sometimes when people say, well, why does diversity matter? I said, well, these women passed over 400 pieces of legislation that speak to our values, including wage equity, including background checks for guns. I mean, it was 400 pieces of a stalemate of almost 25 years. All of a sudden, that was the force, right? That's why diversity matters. And so my question to you that I hear often as working in the Latino community is a lot of Latinas who want to run, but the very stark reality is that they do not have access to fundraising. And that is a barrier, not having that network of money. Speak a little bit to that and how people can overcome that. What is your suggestions?
Yeah, this is something that we all, again, comes back to being intentional in our support. Not everybody starts at the same starting line. They just don't. There is a starting line, and we've got to get everybody to that starting line as quickly as possible. So our Latina sisters, our African-American sisters in particular are dealing with, well, here, let me go back up. When you start fundraising, the first thing you do is you call your friends and family in your immediate circle. So if you are a Latina and you're already in a wage gap problem, right? Like one of the worst in the country, because we have wage issues that are terrible. You're calling all your friends who are also not making as much money as their white counterparts. So let's just start from that. So you're already starting from a deficit because of the institutional racism among wage gap. And then you've got to lift up and prove that you can win, that you're competitive while you're struggling getting the resources. And so I'll tell you, they do it because we work with Latinas and African Americans and Native Americans, the same challenges all the time. But it is for organizations like Emily's List still that have got to our best of our ability, like lift this issue up, like, and really focus on getting resources to our women of color who are running, because they do start from a deficit. Now, white women start from a slight deficit as well, but it is not even close to compare. It's not. I mean, I've watched it over and over again. And once the races become competitive, because super talented, awesome candidates, then the money will come. But we've got to do more, all of us, to get more Latinas and African Americans and Native American women competitive faster. And that is like, it's a calling that we just have to do. And Emily's List has really expanded and almost revamped how we go about doing this work. We have not been perfect, and I am not saying we are. We need to be better too. And there's some great organizations out there that do work in these communities as well, like Higher Heights in the African American women's community, and Collective, and and there's the Latino Victory Fund that deals directly with candidates. There are organizations, but they're not nearly of the size, and we recognize that too. So it's our job to help partner and uplift as much as possible. But I also will say everybody's got to fundraise. And we can help teach, and then we got to open up some doors that are currently not open. That's what we've got to do, period.
And I think, and I think, Stephanie, and I know for myself, just culturally in the Latino community, asking anybody for anything is really hard. Asking them for money is even harder. And in my journey building Voto Latino, one of the things I kind of had an aha moment is that it was only going to be a thought of on a piece of paper if I didn't find the courage to ask people for money to help us build something that was in the service of others, right? And I think that is the challenge. Like when you're running for a candidate, like I'm running not for me, I'm running to be the service of others. And I think that helps shift people's mindset of making those asks.
I'm so glad you said that. That is so important. It's not like you're asking for money to go buy a new outfit.
Right.
Literally asking for money.
No, but it's important.
Yes, you do gotta look the part, but you are literally asking for resources to make change, to serve. Like, so you do that mindset's so important. And I know it's harder and different. It's hard for everybody to ask for money. It is harder I know I've heard that so often in the Latinx community. I hear that all the time also in our indigenous community with our Native American sisters is particularly hard. But let me just say, like, you can do it because it's an investment in the future. It's not, it's you making the ask for sure, but that's what you're selling is a future that's going to be better for everybody that's involved. And that's pretty good. Let folks decide if they want to make that investment. Give them the opportunity. This is what I tell guys all the time. It's like, give them the opportunity to invest, to give it as a business investment. And if they don't want to, ask them again a month later.
Right. But it's so funny because that's the thing is like, it's this understanding that the person may not be primed to give you now, but when they see that your dedication and your passion, they do come around, right? And you just have to be consistent, persistent, but also offering a vision that will improve their lives as well. And I think that sometimes we get stuck in that it's actually not about you, the candidate, it's about the future that you're offering because you're at the table, that you represent a community that oftentimes is not served, whether you are a woman looking for, trying to have more females in the boardroom or wage equity or childcare as a standard for everyone. It's this understanding that you do represent hundreds of thousands of people behind you. And I think that does shift people's, I think, perception of why they must run. And to that, I want to ask you, Stephanie, when you and Christina got together to write this book, what was the hardest chapter to write?
Well, oh my gosh, that is a crazy hard question. I had Christina, so she was just like taskmaster, and we just got through all of this.
We all need Christinas, guys.
We do. I got to tell you, everybody needs a Christina Reynolds. She's amazing, and also super, super talented communications strategist as well. But it wasn't for me, I will say specifically a chapter. It's so funny. As I push all women to tell their stories, part of the hard part for me was telling part of my stories and putting myself out. And initially the book was going to be just fabulous stories of candidates and now elected officials and lessons. And along the way, it was decided that some of my life experiences would go in as well. And I will fully admit it was something I had to get over, not just in sort of like my general background, though a lot of folks know it, but then actually I talk about this in the book, and sort of in the middle of the writing of the book, I suffered a stroke, which I'm doing great. I'm in very, very good health now.
You are.
Yes, I'm so lucky. To anyone, others who've suffered strokes, you've said it's very different for everybody. But it did knock me down for a bit, and I wasn't sure if I was going to share that piece of the story. And I thought, well, wait a second, I'm asking people to be vulnerable in their story and authentic, and I'm not going to tell them this huge piece of my life happened while I was writing the book. My goodness, in a Lyft, by the way, with a really nice Lyft driver who was really lovely. I just want to say it was really great. Eric, the Lyft driver. But and so I sort of because I guess it was part of me was that still, because we're stewed in the misogyny, right? It's like, it's even as a feminist, I've been stewed in the misogyny, and I thought, are people going to think less of me? And then I thought, oh my gosh, I literally work in an organization that says, no, that is not how we do this. And yet in the cells of my being is that misogyny that has been pumped into me by culture that I had to fight through myself. And so I did that and shared that for that reason, because it's ridiculous that we have this unbelievable standard that we're supposed to be meeting and making no mistakes and being perfect, and all is supposed to be, rosy, and we're not supposed to challenge the establishment. And when we do, and look at the women who are challenging the establishment now in Congress, the ones who get pointed out the most are the ones who are making the biggest ruckus. I'll even give it to, I'm not a fan of hers, but Liz Cheney, look at what's happening to her right now. She was brave enough in this moment to stand by our institutions, and other men also did that, but are not getting nearly as attacked as Liz Cheney. This is a gendered situation, because we aren't supposed to be the ones who go against the grain, whatever the grain is. And I'm just saying, we got to go against the grain, because we got to get people used to it. That's it. We just got to do it.
Well, and Stephanie, I have to share with you, I know how, how much of just in your personality, how reserved you are. And by your telling your own personal journey, it gives other women courage and demonstrates that there's pathways, and that vulnerability, I actually believe that vulnerability is actually our armor. It is something that becomes impenetrable. People cannot go after you when you speak your truth. And so with that, I want to thank you for that. But there's something also very important, I think sometimes, that we forget to do as women. And COVID has wreaked havoc on our gender. We have been losing wages. We have a different type of tax that you often speak of, the pink tax. And in that mire, we also have goals, and they're all big and audacious. And sometimes we forget to celebrate. Speak to why it's important to celebrate liberally and why it's so important. And perhaps talk a little bit about what you've celebrated. I've celebrated the fact that you have recovered and you are still so amazing, providing us with guidance in what was a really hard 4 years. And so I celebrate you, but talk about the importance of celebrating liberally.
We have this final chapter. I know it was funny. It was sort of at the last one, we're like, we've got to talk about this, because we also we talk about joy a lot at Emily's List too. And to do this joyfully, you don't want to be miserable trudging through life like this is, and you really don't want to do that when you're running organizations, because the people around you catch that vibe really fast. So don't do that. You got to find it as a leader. It's hard some days. I have to say, I've stood in the parking lot at Emily's List going, okay, put your face on and you can do this. And honestly, I would walk in with my big smile and it wasn't maybe always totally real. And within 10 minutes it was. Like it's contagious. And then you get it back. So that's part of it. But we have to celebrate liberally. We have to do this. When we win, we have to say in those moments, like, we just broke a gigantic glass ceiling with Kamala Harris, the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman, the first woman, the first as Vice President of the United States. Are you kidding me? This is huge. Like, it's hard in the pandemic, but huge party. I wear my Kamala
huge
shirt
party.
all the time, and we're just gonna little parties, big parties. We're gonna have big parties at some point when we can. Like, we have to celebrate the victories, but we also have to celebrate by being very intentional about using the power we just got. So the other piece of this is, okay, you won, and this is awesome. And now you change the world, or you got the big job. Now you're going to do the most with it. And I'm going to ask you to try to find some great sisters to pull with you in this process, because let me tell you, the guys do that every single day. And if we don't start doing the same thing, it's never going to happen. This is how it works. We can do this. And we're good at this. We organize all the time. That's what we do. We organize at the schools. We organize at the churches. We organize the Girl Scouts. That's what we do. We can totally do this. But we've got to also, like, once we get that a moment and we get to celebrate and enjoy it, like, be happy and be joyful about it, but then take it on and get the job done and make change.
And revolution. I love it. So I want to open it up, Stephanie. I want to open this up to some questions, because not surprisingly, people have tons of things to ask you. They want to pick your brain of wisdoms. And so there's the first question is coming from Laura Sullivan. I'm considering running for office, but not sure where to start. What questions should be asked to understand the why behind the motivation? And also, do you recommend starting local?
This is well, first you should think about what's most interesting to you. What are you driven by? Are you driven by education? Are you driven by environment? Are you just, do you have some special, interest? You don't necessarily have to, but if you've got a specialty, I would think about that. But I also would just take a really hard look at what's going on in your community and where there's a need for public service. And that may be on the city council and local, that may be in the legislature, maybe at the state legislature. You don't have to start local, but I also don't want you to overlook local. Local drives a huge amount of what happens in our daily lives. And we really need to think about who's on our school boards, who's on our city councils, who's on our county commissions. I know there's a whole TV show called Parks and Recs, but there is, because that actually is an elected job in a lot of places. There are so many offices around this country, and it all depends on where you live. So you got to do some research. It's easy now. Everybody's on a computer. It's easy to figure out, like, where do I start? Go to the city, find out what the elected offices are, go to the county, find out what the elected offices are, and go to the state and look and kind of see what the best fit for you would be and where the best opportunity is. You also have to be realistic about this. Yes, and we talk about this pretty bluntly. Incumbents that have been there a long time, they can be beat. But you got to really understand if they're, like, super well liked in the community, they're harder to beat. It can be a challenge. So no, you got to spend a little time understanding who your opponent is. Now, if it's open, you may not know. And that's the open seats are great. When there's no incumbent, you got to look at that really seriously. Those ones are good. But you got to just kind of do the work. And we've got sort of a checklist of, like, how to go about that research in the book. Because I think that's the best way to do it. But I'm thrilled you're thinking about running. There's definitely an office or two probably that could be very exciting for you. And you'd be amazed how many elected offices there are. The other thing, if I may, is a lot of cities and counties have boards and commissions that get appointed leaders that we overlook all the time too, that make a lot of decisions about communities. And I would also look at those boards and commissions and see if there's anything that grabs your eye there. They're not elected, they're appointed. So you get to know your city council person or the county person, or find out what the process is. Sometimes it's a nonpartisan process, sometimes it is. Here's the thing about America. Every state is different. Every community is different. Every town is different on how it's structured. So you got to do a little bit of research, but there's all these other opportunities that then can springboard you into a higher office and you'll meet people, because that's the other thing. You got to build your network. And that's the case, as you know, in every aspect of your life, to keep moving up, because you need support systems around you and folks that can help you. And that's a good way to get to know your community really well.
So the next question is from Jane Weinstein. I'm 67. From your point of view, what are the political intentions of the millennial generation? Do they recognize the history of suffrage and struggle women were up against to follow their political and intellectual passions? Specifically, for example, the voices of such characters as Grimke sisters or Harriet Tubman. Thank goodness she was added to the group of statues in Central Park, New York City.
Yeah, that was awesome. That was awesome. Well, I'm a Gen Xer, so I can't speak exactly to what is known by the millennial generation, but I will tell you this. We have a lot of millennials obviously working at Emily's List, and we have more and more millennials running for office. And I find them full of passion and desire to change for social justice. And I think we are very lucky. And the next generation is coming up too, by the way. The next generation, I don't know what's the name of I should know the name of the next.
Gen Z, and they're already voting.
They're voting. I was just going to say, they are voting. So there's a whole, they're here. They're here. And also coming in, even with a different, it seems, at least anecdotally, and there's a little bit of research coming on this now, are even more social justice minded. So very interesting. But you're right. Do they know that all of the history of the voting rights movement for women? You know the education system in this country as well as I do. And we don't share this information. It's why the museum is so important. It's why we all need to spend time sharing stories. And I go back to history, and stories are so important. It is how we pass down information in our society. And so I'll say to you, part of your responsibility is to share the stories too. And it's part of my responsibility to share the stories. I think it depends on which groups, but I'm hopeful that they're learning. And there's been, as of late, some really great entertainment pieces that have been done. I don't know if you watch Mrs. America, but I thought it was just a great way for those who maybe didn't know the early histories of the ERA and the challenges, and then the failure, and now maybe the revival. I mean, so it's right. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like it just keeps moving. It just keeps moving. So I think we have to take it upon ourselves to keep educating, and that's on all aspects of our history.
Yeah. Well, and I think something too is that while it was interesting. I was on the board of Planned Parenthood, Stephanie, and in the beginning, when I was on the board, there was this real challenge of a lot of young women not identifying themselves as feminist. And then through the trajectory of all the anti-abortion laws, you saw the swell of young women and saying, wait a second, I believe in all of my capacity and my agency over my body. And the ones that are out voting young men are women. Young women are very much leading the charge. They are running for office. They are changing, and they're changing the face of what the spaces they feel that there should be a part of. And that has everything to do with this better understanding of, where we belong. But it's been through trailblazers of folks, of women of the past. I do think, though, that the big difference is that there's still a lot of barriers for young women of color. and encouraging them to run because they are heads of households. You remember, Stephanie, you and we, Voto Latino and Emily's List, we did a survey together, and we found that a 23-year-old young Latina, when it came to healthcare, was as equally charged as a 53-year-old white woman. And that was because they were technically both sandwich generations. They were experiencing the same thing. And so I think that young women may not know like the roots of all of our history because it's not taught in schools, as
Right.
you mentioned, Stephanie. They are charged with, wait a second, I'm ready and move along. So we have to figure out, how do we create those pathways? And what you guys are doing with a lot of your diversity work right now in Emily's List, I hope, and I know that's something that you guys are really tackling. But you mentioned the Equal Rights Amendment. So Lori Burton was reading your mind, and she says, do you think having the Equal Rights Amendment in the Constitution will be a foundational support for these changes?
And I sure hope
And I assume
so.
the changes of electing women. Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I would like to think so. I think at its core, though, the economic challenges women, particularly women of color, face need to be addressed immediately. Because part of the problem of getting parity, let's say, at least 50% of the decision-making tables being women, which I don't think is enough, by the way, because first off, we are more than 50% of the population, and we also need to make up for lost time. I mean, seriously, like a lot of lost time. So we should have a lot more women at the table. But part of the challenge we run into all the time, María Theresa talked about the fundraising challenge, but there's a challenge even before that, which is the personal economics of running for office. Can you afford to continue raising your family and paying rent and buying food? And do you have a car? Like the life costs of it all. And that somehow needs to be really addressed. And we've got to do that. I'd like to think that the ERA will help in that, ensuring all women get paid equally to men. Mm-hmm. So that at least corrects one part, not all of it. And that there's then all these other changes that can make it so they're more economically stable to take on running. And then sort of the next phase of that is, now we've got it. Now we can really pull through. But there seems to be, there are economic obstacles that are both systemic sexism and systemic racism that's sitting in the way, particularly now. Like, we don't really know yet, though we're starting to see the economic damage of women in this pandemic. And this recession is a women's recession. It is very painful. And when women lose a year of salary, which is happening for lots of them, they never come back in any real way. You can't, so it's going to be really, really important for our society to commit to equalizing women and men when it comes to economics quickly, because the families won't make it.
Right. No, I think that's right. And I think that so we have one final question, but I think the question that Lynn Jordan is asking really sums up a lot of the work that you do at Emily's List, but also hits about how do we influence the people that we support. So elected officials seem to discount communications from people who are not constituents from their geographic area. When I contribute to Canada outside of my area, how can I continue to communicate my support or opposition to legislation or policy that they can influence?
That is a great question. And I will start in a very honest way, which is they are going to have a heavy response to their constituents, because they are actually there to represent first those constituents. However, you invested in them because they have a shared sense of values. Otherwise, you wouldn't have put resources into those candidates. It's just like Emily's List. Like, we don't support every single woman that runs. We only support Democratic pro-choice women for very particular reasons. I mean, we believe that choice is a value, that ensuring a woman's ability to direct her own life in all aspects, particularly as it relates to having a baby or not. Like that right. is key. And we believe that the Democratic Party is committed to economic opportunities for women and people of color. Don't get it right all the time, have more work to do, got it, but the other side, not doing that. So that's why we are doing this. So you should always feel completely free to call or write any member of Congress or the Senate from anywhere, because they are looking at volume of information coming in and opinions. Now they'll look at which ones came in from their area, but they'll also look at what else is coming in. Trust me. They are counting. They get reports every morning about how many letters and how many calls came in on a certain issue. And I think it's really important to do that if you're very passionate about something, really, truly. Don't think they're not paying attention. I can guarantee they're looking at the number every single day. Only because I was the chief of staff for a US Senator, and I can tell you, we looked at the numbers every single day to get a sense, because you can only get a sense of where things are going. And also, like, yes, we are in different states and we're in different congressional districts, but we are in one country. And things can start moving. They can start in one place and start moving. They're not, I know there's borders, but they're free idea, at least thus far in the United States. There's not a border wall around Montana. So yet, God help us. Some of these states I do worry, and I love my people, but again, it's just part of this. We used to joke about Californians moving in, that we were afraid of that. I mean, this is sort of like the regional.
You still are though, right? Montana.
A little bit. We really are, and I love I love the Californians. I'm just telling.
Californians, we're nice people. We're nice people.
I know. It's so true. But there is I'm going to use a weird word, sort of a vibe, as ideas change and take over, and social media crosses, like, it has no borders. So if you think about that, we can make change in a much bigger way than we used to be able to do before technology. Now we can also cause problems, as we know, with this too. So we have to be mindful of this, and we have to make some regulations that protects bad things from happening, but allows open thought. So this is kind of a unique time in our history that people in, I'm going to just bring up my home state of Montana, actually have much more access to the ideas that are coming out of California and Nevada and Texas and New York and Oklahoma. I mean, so it's like they're coming from everywhere. I don't think that's such a bad thing. It just means we all have to get really active and communicating.
And I think, Stephanie, you're right that members do listen, even though you may not be the priority as a constituent, but if you do sign that petition or you do make that phone call, there is a tally that takes place. And so, Stephanie, I have to share with you that I know that we have been friends and colleagues for a long time. I learned a bit about you from you today. So thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. I know that you recently announced that you were going to step down from Emily's list. That is for further conversation, but you have been such a fierce leader. And my goodness, taking back 2018 and then toppling Trump, what else how better can we leave on a high note with what you've been able to do? And you've changed the face of Congress and our possibility. So this has been such a privilege to spend some time with you. And Shelley, you are a rock star, Shelley McClaster.
We're sort of fast talkers, and you are right with us.
Rock star.
Amazing.
Well, I would just like to Thank you again to both you, Stephanie and María Theresa, for stepping in as moderator this afternoon, and also to Shelley for providing oh my gosh, I can't speak, for interpretation services during this conversation. As a reminder, this program was recorded. It will be available for viewing on womenshistory.org later this week. If you enjoyed this program today, please join us next Sunday, February 7th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, as we welcome Dr. Brenna Wynn Greer, Knaufel Assistant Professor of Social Sciences, the Department of History at Wellesley College, for a conversation commemorating Rosa Parks's inspiring activism on what would be her 108th birthday. That's part of the National Women's History Museum's Black History Month celebration in honor of generations of African American women who struggled through adversity to achieve full citizenship in American society. All of these events are free. Advanced registration is required. You can find more details and information on womenshistory.org. But I do want to thank you again so very much, María Theresa, on your birthday for stepping in today, Stephanie, for your wonderful insight, and for Shelley as well. And I just want to say, stay healthy, stay warm. I know many of us are experiencing very cold temperatures and snow right now, so stay warm, and we certainly hope to see all of you again very soon at another program. So thank you again so much for being with us today, and we hope to see you all very soon.
Great, thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor.